Welcome to the Kenya Wantam Notam movement, the KWM podcast. Today, we're embarking on, well, a really crucial deep dive. We're looking into a significant voice emerging from Kenya's public discourse, the Kenya Wantam Notam movement, or KWM for short. Our mission here for this deep dive is really to impartially unpack the arguments and, the insights presented in a recent KWM article. It's titled Ruto's Hypocrisy, Why His KSH 1.2b Church is a Monument to Corruption. So we'll explore their viewpoint, try to understand the details and the context they're providing, but importantly, without endorsing any particular political stance. Our goal, as always, is just to illuminate the information for you, our listeners, so you can clearly understand what KWM is communicating.
Yeah, and it was particularly interesting, I think, is how KWM frames its whole mission right there on their platform. Their banner, it lays out a really clear, very direct message to leaders. It says, notice to current or future presidents, cabinet, parliament, county leaders.
Yeah.
Skiza wickedness, skiza ground. Or be impeached, be kicked out by our votes, even before one term ends. And that phrase, skiza wickedness, skiza ground, it's powerful stuff. It basically translates to listen to Kenyans, listen to the ground, right? It emphasizes this demand for leaders to genuinely hear and, importantly, respond to the everyday realities, the needs of the people. So it sets a very, very clear and assertive stage for the kind of critical accountability they're pushing for. We'll definitely see that reflected in the article we're looking at today. It's like their foundational statement, holding power to account.
That is a powerful start, a really direct preamble to their core message. So let's really unpack this then, starting with KWM's core argument about this significant shift they seem to observe in leadership. The article highlights what it calls a transformation of a leader, specifically moving from Mr. Kasongo to Bishop Kasongo. Now, for KWM, what's really driving this change? Why is it so central to their critique?
Well, KWM, they certainly don't mince words here. They characterize this transformation as way more than just, simple rebranding. They actually call it a masterclass in deceit and moral decay. Wow. So they're implying it's not some organic evolution, but a deliberate, almost calculated strategy.
Okay, deceit and moral decay. Strong words.
Very. From their perspective, it's a calculated move to improve his public image while continuing to plunder from the people he swore to serve. The article really paints this picture of a leader who, they claim, once loudly denounced corruption, but now seems to be embracing it, basically turning the State House into what they call his personal playground for graft and excess. Wow. So KWM sees this as a fundamental, almost cynical shift, not just in the title, but in the very essence of integrity and priorities in leadership. They're basically alleging it's a strategic illusion.
So, okay, for KWM, this isn't just about a change in name. It's about a perceived strategic manipulation of how the public sees things, and it's directly tied to their critique of governance. That's a pretty strong opening statement.
Oh, absolutely. They connect this perceived transformation directly to actions and perceived failings in how things are run. They frame it as a kind of mask for continued questionable practices. It immediately sets a pretty confrontational tone for the rest of their argument.
Right. And here's where it gets, I think, really interesting. KWM zooms in on a very specific, very substantial point. It almost becomes a symbol for their whole argument. This proposed KSH 1.2 billion church, that's a huge figure for any project, really, especially for a nation. What are KWM's primary questions, their main concerns about this, colossal undertaking?
KWM immediately and quite forcefully questions if this is necessary. Is it appropriate, given Kenya's wider socioeconomic situation? They describe Kenya as a nation, quote, struggling with poverty, crumbling infrastructure, and failing public services. And then they directly challenge the idea of whether it truly needs another grand building of worship. And they follow this with a really provocative rhetorical question, which you often see in these kinds of advocacy pieces. Does God really need his shiny new church, or does he call on us to fix the broken systems that impact every Kenyan's life? So they're explicitly framing this as a direct conflict, almost a moral dilemma, you could say, between spending on these grand symbols versus addressing really pressing, tangible national needs. It's a very pointed critique of, how resources are being allocated.
Yeah, it sounds like they're presenting a really stark, deliberate choice there, contrasting spiritual symbols with very immediate, very tangible societal needs. It's not just questioning the cost, is it? It's the philosophy behind spending that kind of money when other needs are, unmet.
Precisely. KWM asserts this project is nothing less than a vanity project. They imply that its proponents believe that just, erecting a massive structure can heal the nation's deep-rooted problems. And then they challenge that assumption directly. They ask, Will a church building actually fix the country's decaying roads, overcrowded hospitals, and collapsing schools?
And their answer is?
For KWM, it's unequivocal, they state. No amount of prayer can put food on the table or provide medical care for the sick. For KWM, the real church that Kenya needs lies in action. Action that improves the lives of its people, not in gold-plated crosses and marble floors. It's a powerful statement about where they believe priorities should really lie, shifting focus from, say, spiritual architecture to societal well-being.
That's a very clear, very stark contrast they're drawing. And it leads us to some incredibly strong language KWM uses. They talk about the perceived impact of this leadership, even referring to bloodstained hands. That's not a phrase you encounter lightly in political commentary. What exactly is the article linking these very potent images to?
Well, this raises a really important and, frankly, deeply unsettling question from KWM about the consequences, as they see them, of this perceived hypocrisy and poor governance. They connect this vivid image directly to the tragic deaths of Gen Z, the rise of corruption, and the shattered dreams of a generation.
Wow.
KWM posits that these failures rest on his shoulders, and they challenge the very notion that any God who would accept such hypocrisy. So they are drawing a very explicit, very emotional line from leadership actions or perhaps inactions to profound human suffering and what they see as a deep sense of betrayal among the younger generation.
So it's a visceral critique.
Extremely. It's emotionally charged, designed to highlight the human cost as KWM sees it. They're arguing that these perceived moral failings have real, tangible, and, well, tragic consequences.
So KWM isn't just highlighting a deep concern for the future of Kenya's youth, but also the perceived moral implications of the current governance. They're really arguing these aren't just policy failures, but profound moral ones with direct human impact.
That's absolutely right. For KWM, that moral dimension seems central to their criticism. They emphasize the profound impact on the lives of ordinary Kenyans, especially the youth, who they portray as really bearing the brunt of these perceived failures.
Okay, shifting slightly but relatedly, KWM makes a very clear distinction between symbolic gestures like this church, perhaps, and what they call real change. What kind of concrete examples does the article give to illustrate this point, to push beyond just the church project itself?
Yeah, they paint a very vivid, almost heartbreaking picture of the practical, everyday challenges that Kenyans reportedly face. They mention hospitals where the sick are left to suffer, classrooms overcrowded with students and underfunded teachers, roads that remain unsafe, and, of course, unemployment rates that continue to climb.
So, real bread and butter issues.
Yeah, exactly. And they argue unequivocally that none of these issues are solved by flashy gestures.
Yeah.
They're pushing for this relentless focus on tangible, quantifiable improvements in daily life for the average Kenyan, contrasting it sharply with what they see as superficial displays. It's that classic argument, right? Bread and butter versus pomp and circumstance.
So given these examples of, well, widespread problems, what then does KWM define as true leadership?
Yeah.
In stark contrast to these symbolic gestures they've just described.
KWM states it very clearly, very unambiguously. True leadership is about delivering results for the people. Simple as that for them. They really emphasize this point by describing the KSH 1.2 billion church plans as, quote, a slap in the face to every Kenyan struggling to make ends meet.
Slap in the face.
Yeah. And they further state that the billions that could have been used to rebuild this country are instead being poured into a building that no one asked for. And interestingly, from KWM's perspective, they seem to believe the youth are particularly insightful here. The article makes it quite clear that the youth of Kenya are not fooled. It says they are out there marching for justice, demanding the future that they were promised. They have seen through the illusion. This really indicates a strong belief from KWM that the younger generation is especially attuned to the difference between, say, rhetoric and actual tangible progress, and they see them as the ones holding leaders accountable.
It sounds like KWM views the youth as this critical, discerning force for change, unafraid to challenge what they perceive as hypocrisy, which brings us to KWM's direct assessment of this disconnect between promises made and the reality people experience on the ground. What's their assessment? The vision laid out versus what has actually been built or achieved according to them.
Well, KWM states that Kenyans have heard the promises. You know, the typical promises like roads will be fixed, schools will be upgraded, hospitals will be modernized. We hear these kinds of things often. Yet what KWM claims people have actually seen are, quote, empty promises, empty pockets, empty lives.
That's stark.
It is. They argue that the nation remains stagnant, while the president spends billions on optics instead of addressing the real issues. And KWM starkly concludes, The only thing that has been built under Ruto's watch is a mountain of lies. It's a very damning assessment, isn't it? Even poetic, in a harsh way, of the perceived gap between official rhetoric and the lived reality for many Kenyans. They use strong, evocative language to really drive this point home. Leaves little room for ambiguity.
And ultimately then, given all these points they've raised, the leadership transformation, the critique of priorities, the impact on youth, promises versus reality, how does KWM finally view this KSH 1.2 billion church project? What does it truly represent to them in the larger narrative they're building?
Well, if we connect all these threads, KWM sees the church as standing as a permanent reminder of his hypocrisy. They don't just see it as, say, a misguided project or poor resource allocation. No, they see it as a monument. A monument built by, in their words, a man who uses faith as a shield to cover up his greed, negligence, and betrayal of the Kenyan people.
So faith as a shield.
That's the phrase they use. KWM directly challenges the notion that, quote, by waving his hands in the air and shouting hallelujah, he can wash away the mess he's created. And they assert quite directly, God doesn't need a new house, Ruto. He needs a leader who can deliver on promises, not one who hides behind wealth and power. So its position is this powerful, enduring symbol, but not of faith or progress, according to KWM. It's a symbol of perceived failure, misdirection, and a profound betrayal of public trust. It really encapsulates all their criticisms into one physical structure.
This deep dive into the KWM perspective, it really reveals a passionate and, yes, profoundly critical voice regarding Kenya's leadership and national priorities. It's clear they believe in direct action, in accountability. If you're finding this exploration thought-provoking, perhaps challenging, and you want to understand more about how citizens are engaging with these complex issues, we really encourage you to explore their platform further, engage with their ideas. You can visit www.wantumnotam.com, create your account there, start sharing your own ideas that you think can help change your village, your city, your nation. So wrapping things up slightly, what does this all mean for Kenya? According to the KWM perspective we've just unpacked, what's their ultimate message to you, the listener, and maybe to the nation as a whole?
Well, KWM's conclusion is pretty clear and unwavering. Kenya doesn't need another grand building. What Kenya needs, in their view, is a leader who truly understands the real pressing needs of its people. A leader who will prioritize, as they say, schools, hospitals, and infrastructure over optics. They're calling for a leader who will lead with integrity, vision, and compassion. Essentially, someone who genuinely delivers on promises, rather than just making them. Their message is a direct, quite emphatic demand for tangible, people-centric governance, rooted in accountability and, well, real-world impact.
And the KWM article, it ends with a really powerful, quite provocative thought for you, our listener, to consider. It's a real call to action, almost, for the future of the nation. It reads, Kenya deserves more than this. You deserve more than this. It's time for real leadership, not more of the same empty rhetoric. The youth of Kenya are ready for change, and they will not stop fighting until they get the leadership they deserve. That's a profound statement of conviction, isn't it? A rallying cry for a different future as they see it. We invite you to be part of that conversation. Explore how you might contribute to change as championed by the Kenya Wantum Notum movement. Again, visit www.wantumnotum.com, create your account, and start sharing your ideas that can help change your village, city, and nation. Thank you for listening to the Kenya Wantum Notum movement, KWM podcast. We certainly hope this deep dive has given you a clearer, perhaps more nuanced understanding of what is undoubtedly a significant voice in Kenya's ongoing national conversation.